Hello and welcome to this very special segment, News Hour Direct. Joining me tonight is Sai Deepak, author, senior advocate in the Supreme Court. And Sai Deepak, we speak on a day when we are still waking up from the aftermath of what happened in the Delhi blast in the evening hours of 10th of November, 10/11. We are now looking at this investigation that rounds up almost 5 or 6 doctors that are coming together. And for a very long time, we've been probably saved from blasts and waking up to the reality that the vulnerability still exists. How do you respond to the aftermath?
I think, first of all, I'd like to thank the intelligence apparatus of this country for having saved us from a major disaster, from what I understand. And it appears that what has happened is probably a product of somebody panicking because of the extensive operations that were undertaken. So I think that needs to be placed on record. Second, I would like to extend my sincere condolences to all the families which have suffered bereavement. And third, I think it's now time to bust the myth that poverty and terror go hand in hand. That much is clear. And I don't think education has had an impact whatsoever on this mindset.
Are you saying that the old madrasa model of indoctrination that was on the radar of intelligence agencies, that doctrine needs to change? Because clearly these doctors in the net now, 5 or 6 of them, from Dr. Muzammil to Dr. Shaheen to Dr. Adil to Dr. Omar, many more being picked up. We don't know their roles yet. And some of them, in fact, Dr. Adil, picked up from Saharanpur, was earning a salary of 4 lakh rupees per month according to reports. So poverty, clearly not something. Are we looking at a shift in the doctrine that we followed so far?
I think it's time we actually awakened to this reality. This has been a reality for quite some time. Because the fact of the matter is perhaps the people on the ground are picked up from poorer families. But the ones who plan, the ones who have a vision, the ones with an agenda, the ones with the capability to brainwash, to indoctrinate and radicalize, don't necessarily come from poor families. That's never been the case. And this has been the history of this country at least since the 18th century, after the fall of the Mughal Empire, after Aurangzeb's death in 1707. I've written extensively on this. People have written extensively on this. So to actually say that it's only a clutch of people who are teaching in the madrasas who are responsible for engendering and fostering this mindset is a myth that we should have disabused ourselves of from, I think, at least 30, 40 years ago. Now, in the last 11 years or so, we have tried everything, given them a computer, scholarships and whatnot. You've done everything that you could. But unfortunately, I don't think you've managed to change the fundamental problem, because I think we are still beating around the problem. We are beating around the bush.
Are you linking it to a religion? You will once again be labeled as Islam hater. You will be labeled as a minority hater, because many people in the political class are now coming out once again to give cover fire, calling this the outcome of oppression and deprivation.
If anything, I have been an open admirer of Sri Abul Pakir Jalaluddin Abdul Kalam. I have said this as much in my books. I've been an open admirer of his brand of philosophy and his thought process. If anything, of all the people who I've visited and paid my last respects to, he was among the first when he passed away in Delhi. So I don't think I need to hold forth my beliefs, or I don't need to sit and burnish my own credentials. What I believe in and what I do is irrelevant. The facts are in front of us. I'm saying that there is a particular mentality, and that mentality has no boundaries, respects no boundaries, respects no geography, and has no discrimination based on the economic status. And that much has become clear. Now, whether you pin it to a mentality, to a mindset, to a group, to a philosophy, that's entirely up to the people. I don't need to spell it out. I am just saying that all these days, we have belabored under a delusional belief that it is only poverty that manages to radicalize people, And I hope we come out of that deep Kumbhakarna slumber. That was never the case, and I hope that should not that we don't labor under that impression anymore.
What do you make
See, you
of
have to
social injustice? That is the social injustice that leads to a radicalization of this kind is another argument that has come forth.
See, this perpetual minority victimhood cottage industry that's been going on in this country, I think it's time that we put an end to it and say enough is enough. When will somebody introspect with respect to the cause, and when will they ask hard questions of themselves, as opposed to constantly fielding an array of so-called intellectuals who will trot out this very same tropes and the very same social justice arguments, as opposed to asking a very serious question. I'll actually put this in a slightly different way. Assuming for a moment that the terrorists had belonged to any other community, or perhaps a non-Muslim community, and if they had unfortunately belonged to the Hindu community, I'm sure by now they would have immediately pointed fingers at the faith. They would have pointed fingers at caste, they would have pointed fingers at supremacism, they would have pointed fingers at fascism, they would have pointed fingers at Hindutva and whatnot. This much has been very clear, and once the formulation of Hindu terror has taken place under the previous regime, it was clear that if they had the opportunity, they'd have actually continued to push that agenda. Now, why should the logic be any different, and why should the principle be any different if the perpetrators happen to come from a different community?
Fair point, but is it a coincidence that those involved so far happen to be a Dr. Muzammil, Dr. Shaheen, Dr. Adil, Dr. Umar, and there is a Maulvi who was also a male nurse called Irfan Ahmad. Is it a coincidence that they come from one particular community?
I don't know if it's coincidence. I just know that that has been the history of this country. And that's the legacy issue that we have inherited for the longest of times. And we have tried to secularize it. We have tried to paint it with a benign brush. We have tried to cushion ourselves from the hard realities as much as possible. But each day, the truth makes it very, very difficult for us to defend that position. We find ourselves being boxed into smaller and smaller corners. So there will come a point when finally we will wake up and say, I'm sorry, I think we've been fooling ourselves all these centuries. Maybe it's time to call it what it is, to call a spade for what it is. And when countries in the Middle East are open to radicalization in the name of religion, and they're willing to acknowledge that there is a specific role that is played by a particular mentality, and countries of the Middle East seem to be giving advice to Europe that please don't mollycoddle these sentiments, because then you will ultimately pay the price for it. I don't see why should India take a very different position altogether when they're happy to recognize that there is a real problem there. Perhaps India must stop giving two hoots about world opinion and must do what is necessary in its own survival and interest. We are the world's destitute civilization. We have nobody to look up to. If anything, Operation Sindoor proved that there are very few friends that we have, and we are entirely on our own.
You're saying there are forces outside of India that do not stand with us. What about the forces within?
I think it's always easier to identify an external threat. The problem is acknowledging the Trojans within. And those Trojans don't belong to one particular community, because as it stands, we see that from college campuses to every other place, that the threats within do not have a specific religious identity. They cut across religious lines. And that's the truth and perhaps the unfortunate reality of the Bharatiya civilization as it stands.
Well said, but we're looking at a situation, 3,000 kilograms of explosive material found in one location, 80 kilograms in the car that blasts. We're talking about an organized, planned operation that was probably underway. How does this happen? Isn't something that is part of this, which is part of an intelligence failure?
See, apart from the amount of explosives that have been recovered, the amount of ricin that has been recovered as well, the ricin, so to speak, from castor seeds, I think it's unbelievable. The extent of hatred that someone must carry to think of poisoning even prasads in temples, right? So I'm less concerned about the quantity and I'm more concerned about the vision and the amount of venom and hatred behind that vision. It's almost as if somebody is acting on PFI's vision of 2047. I'm sorry to say that. Okay. So if whether this is an intelligence failure or not, I'm not perhaps the best person to comment on it. All I can say is that to a significant extent, a disaster, perhaps a catastrophe has been averted. And therefore, I would be a bit more careful about casting aspersions on the intelligence apparatus or doubting them at this stage, because I think the country must stand by them at this stage. I'm not saying that we must not ask the hard questions, but the fact of the matter is a joint counter-terror operation was indeed conducted, which has resulted in causing panic. And that's one of the reasons that this was an accidental explosion, although it was meant to be intentional.
I mean, we're seeing a subsidized government medical college in Srinagar and Al Falah College and a hospital here in Faridabad, where people would probably go to be cured. The doctors of death were operating from these areas. Can we now, completely connect the dots on what kind of a network we are looking at? There are engineers, there are IT nerds, there are doctors involved. What kind of a setup are we looking at?
Navika ji, I'm not the first person to present this chart in front of the audience, although I've said this before. Think of this entire mindset as having a series of concentric circles, wherein the person who's executing the dirty job on the ground is the only one you get to see. Surrounded by him are people who radicalize. Surrounding them are the people who finance. Surrounding them are the intellectuals who give them the cover fire. Surrounding them are the politicians who depend on them for vote banks. Surrounding them are external actors from outside Bharat. This is the kind of nexus that you're looking at. And we constantly focus only on the person who's executing the job. And the fact of the matter is, all other, let's say, members of the so-called concentric circles are enablers of the person who's actually executing the job. Now, to say that only these handful of people are radicalized, well, I don't think that's possible unless and until somebody is given the confidence. You go and get the job done. We are here to take care of everybody else, including your families. Okay? And of course, the usual suspects who turn up in the Supreme Court on a regular basis to defend them, to say that even they must be given the very same courtesy as everybody else. So I'm sorry to say this. You must recognize that this is a widespread network with its tentacles going beyond the subcontinent, but the immediate problem is obviously in the subcontinent. In my humble view, you address the problem of the subcontinent, the rest of the world will be safer and better off.
Well, Mr. Sai Deepak, in your book, India, Bharat and Pakistan, you've tried to trace the roots of radicalism in India, including the works of those who sought to develop a so-called Middle Eastern consciousness amongst the Indian Muslims. Do you see this prevalent, that there is a culture of Bharat that is alien to them and therefore giving rise, to the kind of network as we saw now appearing in the Delhi blast?
So as far as I am concerned, I can draw a fairly straight line from the non-state actors who gave birth to revivalist Islam after the death of Aurangzeb right until the partition and thereafter, including certain organizations which had the honor and privilege of hosting certain people from Afghanistan in the recent past. That straight line can be drawn. Now, whether we wish to acknowledge those realities and also ask ourselves how much have they actually contributed in what I call as silent radicalization, wherein moderation slowly loses its space, and you also wait for a time when there are enough numbers from within and outside which have the will and the muscle to execute that vision. Until then, we can all sit and watch this Aman Ki Asha Ka Tamasha.
Well, Aman Ki Asha, I think dead and buried for now. But what do you make of those who give cover fire, including people within the mainstream opposition parties like the Congress, which say this has been done to distract from the pollution problem in Delhi, or to polarize the election in Bihar because they were losing, or some people who are coming and saying that the disenfranchise, the fact that there is Hindu Hriday Samrat kind of right-wing government that we have at the center, which is why the minorities are feeling marginalized. What do you make of all these arguments, and what is the way forward for us as Indians?
Aman ki Asha ka tamasha with Pakistan has ended, but Pakistan is not just a country, it's a mindset. So the tamasha has not ended within the country. That's my point. Coming to the next issue, which you've asked. The BJP has been cumulatively in power for how long? 98 to 2004, followed by 2014 till date. So 11 years plus about 6 years. It's about 17 years. So clearly there was no Hindu Hriday Samrat who was at the helm prior to that, and also from 2004 to 2014. So what injustice was happening between 2004 to 2014 to explain the series of blasts that were taking place over a decade? So was Shri Manmohan Singh the Hindu Hriday Samrat, or was Ms. Sonia Gandhi or Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, whatever the appellation may be, the Hindu Hriday Empress? I don't know what is going on here. See, it's easy for a perpetual victimhood mindset to constantly look for enemies. But the fact of the matter is, until 1980, there was no BJP. And even after that, they barely had 2 seats. So how do you explain the instances of terror all along? And where was the BJP anywhere in public scene when it comes to the holding of power when Kashmiri Hindus were driven out from 1988 onwards? What explains that? What social injustice are they talking about? And if that is truly their response, then perhaps Bengali Hindus and Kashmiri Hindus should have equally picked up the weapon, considering what they were subjected to and what they continue to be subjected to. Have they done that? The unfortunate reality, and I'm sorry to say this, Navika ji, that the reality is that it's not just one particular political outfit in this country that defends this mentality. Unfortunately, that soft mentality has percolated and infiltrated across political ideologies, because we don't wish to call it by what it is anymore. We don't wish to squarely look the problem in the eye. Even ideological organizations today are unfortunately softening their stance with respect to hardcore jihadi terror, because they think that it can be reasoned with, it can be bartered with, it can be negotiated with. You can actually extend the olive branch across the table. I can't think of a more delusional position ever, especially given the history of Bharat, because this is precisely what people thought in the 1920s in the backdrop of Khilafat 1.0. This is Khilafat 2.0.
And according to you, if you're the doctor, what is your prescription? First, what's the disease and how do we begin to cure it?
Stop mollycoddling these sentiments in the hope that education will do the job. Crack down on the hammers the way Uttar Pradesh is doing, rightly so. 3, certainly try and engage with those elements who see themselves as part of the Bharatiya spirit. However, you must realize at the end of the day, demography is destiny and democracy is dependent on demography. If you want to look at examples, Kashmir, Bengal, Assam, Kerala, even parts of Andhra Pradesh as of now, parts of Tamil Nadu, all of them are being lost to demographic inversion. Address that first, because without numbers, you can't fight this battle. Because even if you fight the law and order battle, you will lose the larger demographic battle in the long run, because democracy is a function of demography. And once the demography is not in your favor, you don't need to be 51% or 60% to actually hold the reins of power. You only need to have 30% across the board.
How do you work in the 4 walls of the Constitution, which you know so well as a senior advocate?
What is the constitutional justification for a minority welfare ministry still? This was not established in 1947. This has come about only much later. There was no minority welfare ministry before. There was no minority welfare commission before. Please tell me, when was it established and when was it founded? And under what constitutional principle was it even founded? And why is it that it continues post 2014 is a question we still have to ask and answer.
But are you simplifying it too far? There is not only one minority. We're probably addressing ourselves to the largest minority. What about the other very minuscule minorities in this country? Do they not?
The fact of the matter is, their rights are sufficiently protected under Article 29. You don't need a separate commission, because by creating the existence of a commission such as this, you're going to create a country within a country. You are creating the justification for parallel establishments. On the one hand, you can't speak of a UCC, and on the other hand, you can't have a minority commission. They don't go hand in hand. You can't speak of both in the same breath. Surely an ideology that believes in uniform civil code or a secular civil code cannot simultaneously justify the existence of minority welfare commission. Makes no sense whatsoever. So help me understand and unriddle this for me. I am happy to understand this from a logical perspective or even a constitutional perspective.
Well said. Well, the Ministry of Minority Affairs was established in 2006 during the UPA era. UCC, we still haven't got there. We're stuck somewhere in a mind warp, in a time warp in the middle. How are we going to come out of this is the big question. But thank you very much, Sai Deepak, for joining me on the News Hour tonight.
Thank you.